We are up and ready to go, so thank you for coming tonight. So tonight we're covering Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 18. And just as a quick recap from the last couple of weeks, Jesus just began his ministry and went through his own trials, being in the desert, being tempted by Satan, and he has now called his disciples. So when he's giving the Beatitudes, this is his first major public appearance and his first sort of the beginning of his ministry. So in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus spoke words of encouragement for the poor, the sick, the meek, and the needy, promising them that he had come to fulfill the law, and then speaking of a higher spiritual calling for Christians, warning against murder, adultery, oaths, and enemies by exemplifying how these things begin in the heart, not just with the actions that we perform. And that brings us to chapter 6. So to begin here, I would like to go ahead and start by reading verses 1 through 7. So right here, take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound the trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they will have the reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And that your charitable deed may be in secret, that your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly. And when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corner of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father who is in a secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. That is verses 1 through 7. So I'd actually like to go ahead and skip ahead just a little bit here to verses 16 through 18, and I'll explain why in just a second. Continuing with verses 16 and 18. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites, with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear to men to be fasting. Assuredly, I say to you, they will have their reward. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you do not appear to be fasting. But your Father who is in a secret place, but to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. So the reason I skipped verses 8 through 15 is because we're going to come back to that in a little bit. That is the Lord's Prayer. But at the moment, I'd actually like to focus on the way that Jesus is teaching. He is speaking, in this case, with direct commands. Do this and don't do that. That's actually very different from the way that he speaks to his followers throughout the rest of the gospel when he became known for his parables. I think this is actually significant, and it behooves us as Christians to perhaps contemplate why Jesus is not speaking in parables when he begins his ministry. So throughout his ministry, as he continued, Jesus gave many parables. I'm sure we're familiar with a lot of them. These include the parable of the sower, the mustard seed, the hidden treasure, the lost sheep, the unforgiving servant, the 2 sons, the wedding feast, and many, many more. But in order to understand why Jesus gave parables and spoke in parables, I want to take us to Matthew 13, chapter 10. Let me pull out my Bible here real quick, because I don't have this on the screen.
And the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to us in parables?" He answered and said to them, "Because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For whoever has, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And in them the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled, which says, 'Hearing you will hear and shall not understand, and seeing you will see and not perceive. For the hearts of this people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing, their eyes have been closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them.'" Skipping ahead a little bit, Jesus actually directly explains what the parable of the sower meant. "Therefore hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received the seed by the wayside. But he who received the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a little while. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Now he who has received the seed among thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke his word, and he becomes unfruitful. But he who receives seed on the good ground is he who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. So each gospel account of the parable of the sower is actually a little bit different, but there are different ways we could potentially interpret that. Catholics might argue that this means that only the church fathers and their apostolic successors can know the truth, whereas the quote-unquote lay people cannot. Calvinists, by contrast, might argue that only certain souls are predestined, if you will, to receive the word and understand it. But I believe that a more accurate understanding of Jesus' teaching here is that when he talks about the good ground, he's talking about a genuine, repentant heart. The parable of the sower explains why Jesus speaks in parables. Jesus speaks in parables because he wants only the genuine of heart to understand the nature of the kingdom of heaven, lest the Pharisees and the hypocrites merely act out what appears to be moral and thus deceive the flock. This would align well with the rest of the Beatitudes, which teach that sin begins in the heart, rather than just the mere actions that we perform with our bodies in the world. As we learned last week in chapter 5, to hate your brother is the same as murdering him. To lust for a woman is the same as committing adultery. To take oaths is the same as to fail to uphold them. To turn the other cheek and to pray for your enemies is the same as to defeat your enemies and to let God's will prevail with them. If Jesus taught about the nature of the kingdom of heaven using parables for the reason that only the genuine of heart could understand, then it follows logically that Jesus preached the Beatitudes without using parables such that all hearts could understand, both the genuine and the hypocritical, the good ground and the bad ground. But why? Moving forward in Matthew chapter 13 just a little bit. Let me pull that up here. Okay, moving forward a little bit. Another parable he put forth to them said, The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in the field, but while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? He said to them, An enemy has done this. The servants said to him, Do you want us to then go and gather them up? But he said, No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, First gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So this brings us back to chapter 6. In chapter 6, we see Christ outlining a standard of behavior that will separate the wheat from the tares. By giving alms, praying, and fasting in secret, we are forced to remain humble, and thus our hearts, and not just our outward behaviors, are affected. The standard of behavior that Christ outlines in the Beatitudes, if we truly follow it, by nature separates the genuine of heart from the hypocrites. These are the important first steps into becoming a Christian and beginning our walk of faith with Christ. And so it makes sense that this was one of the first things that Christ preached when he began his ministry and called upon his disciples. From there, God would grow the seed that was planted in each of the hearts of those who followed Christ, just as God will continue to do for us as Christians today. Let's take a moment now that we understand the reason that our higher standard of behavior as Christians is mandated by Jesus to consider some of the specific commands given by Christ in chapter 6. Specifically, Christ commands that we are not to seek glory for ourselves when tithing, helping the needy, praying, or fasting. We are only to glorify God as we do these things. Let's think about this practically. Let's say, for example, that somebody comes to you for help who does not know Christ. This person is not only in dire physical need, but also in dire spiritual need. This person's soul has been afflicted by the quote-unquote little devil on his shoulder to believe the lies of Satan. The lies telling him that he is only suffering because God hates him and does not love him and wants to punish him without mercy. If you, as a Christian, give alms and charity to this person while glorifying yourself, say, for example, wanting to take a picture just so you can go out on social media and brag about the charity you're giving, this person walks away thinking that you, and you alone, were the source of the blessing, just because you're nice. And of course, that does nothing to advance God's kingdom. In fact, the little devil on his shoulder, quote unquote, might even exacerbate the lie that God hates him by comparing his misfortunes to your blessings. And of course, that's not where we want to go as Christians. Now instead, imagine if when you give up a little bit to help a person in need, you tell him, "May God bless you as he has blessed me." And then you tell nobody. Literally, nobody. Now, who does this person know provided the blessing? This person will remember only what you said, that God was the source of the blessing. And this brings me back to chapter 6, my favorite part that we skipped over earlier, and that is the Lord's Prayer. When teaching the Lord's Prayer, Jesus reminds us that God already knows the physical things we need. Instead, The prayer focuses on our direct relationship with him. And so I'd like to close by reading the Lord's Prayer. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things that you have need of before you ask him. In this manner, therefore pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. So, thank you, everybody. I think that is the important part of Matthew chapter 6. And I invite everybody back next week as Julian's going to be teaching moving on for the second half of chapter 6. Thank you.